Your Creative Push, episode 260.
It'll be not just a good story, but something that really actually still enriches your confidence to move forward.
Welcome to Your Creative Push, the podcast that pushes you to pursue your creative passions. I'm your host, Youngman Brown, and my guest today is Amarilys Henderson. Amarilyss is a watercolor illustrator, best known for her Skillshare classes, as well as an art form that she created called Watercolor Devos. And she comes on the show today to share that journey, how Watercolor Devos started, and how they led her to the point that she is at today as one of the top instructors on Skillshare. And she shares that whole journey from the very inception of it, where she just didn't have enough time and had to combine two different things that she was interested in, and how she didn't want to share it with anyone at first. And then she shares her journey of starting an Etsy shop, starting her blog, and then getting started in Skillshare and winning the teacher challenge on there. She gives her advice to anyone wanting to start their own courses on Skillshare, and also her advice for anyone who wants to take Skillshare classes, to be strategic with what classes that you want to take, and also about joining that community and sharing your work. Amarilyss also talks about some of the resistances that hold her back, both with her art and with her teaching. And she talks about how she balances her time, noticing the rhythm of her week, and taking herself out to lunch on Fridays to recap how things went. A really inspiring episode, especially if you are somebody who struggles to find time or struggles to find a way to combine the things that you're most passionate about. And also for anybody who's ever tinkered with the idea of starting to share what you know and finding a way to easily do that on a platform that already exists for you to share the things that you know the most about. But that's it. I'll get out of your way, and please do enjoy my conversation with Amarilys Henderson. Amarilyss, welcome to Your Creative Push.
Thank you.
So I was wondering if maybe we could start out with you giving us a brief bio, sort of how you got to the point you are today in your creative life.
Yeah, it's funny because when you look back, you're not really sure how it happened. Just one thing led to another. But it seems kind of obvious in that I was always that girl that, was quiet in the back of the classroom and doodling on something. And that's been me all along. And I then went to school in Savannah College of Art and Design. When I was younger, I asked my mom, what was the best school? And she said that was it. So that was the only application I filled out. Then from that, I worked in graphic design because I received some good advice that when you're, just getting married, it'd be probably better to have a stable income. And
it's helpful.
I did it, and it's experience that I still use, but I worked less and less in my painting. But it turned me on to typography, so there's that. But there was a lull of not creating for a while there. We were living abroad, and then I just paint whenever I just felt like too many feels to handle. Mm-hmm. And the work was not great, but it was just like therapy. Mm-hmm. And then when I came back to the States, my husband and I, we were just kind of rebuilding our life, and I had started an Etsy shop while in China, and that spiraled into a blog and then into actually going full circle and jumping back into illustration.
So when you kind of got past that lull because of all the feels, was that like your intention then? Like, I'm going to get back into this via the blog and via that way? Or was that kind of an accident?
Pretty much nothing was intentional. I'm actually a very intentional person, but it seems like my plans aren't necessarily the avenue that works. But once you start working at something, then other things start to happen. So I actually, that resurgence, I call it my creative renaissance, was when I had my firstborn. So I was a new mom, and just sleeping and feeding and just life was a blur, and I felt like I was losing me. And I got to a point where during nap times, I would just kind of close myself off in what was kind of like an office for us. And I'd just paint and listen to music and do whatever and just kind of remember who I was again. I also, with that, since I wasn't trying to please a client, since I wasn't working full time anymore, I was just trying to do stuff and experiment and explore. And I tied my painting, my creative time with my Christian devotion time. So basically, I'd read the Bible and then something would stick out at me and I'd rewrite the word a million times, or I'd illustrate something that stuck out to me in the story. And I just had such little time that I had to start combining those together in a way that I never gave myself permission to before. That started what I call Watercolor Devos. And that's kind of like a word I made up that's kind of stuck.
I love it. Well, and I want to get into that too, but I think it's such good advice too for people, like two really like key things that you said, like one, not having a plan. Sometimes that's the best thing. Like when you can just like not worry about pleasing other people or having to have somebody buy this. It's just doing something that, you know, you want to do and kind of getting that alone time. And then also combining two things. Like you said, you didn't have the permission before to combine your Christian devotion with that, with your, you know, creative time.
Yeah.
But like for so many people, it's like that, those things that you care the most about, like that's where you're going to really shine as a creative person if you're able to find a way to merge those two things.
Yeah.
So yeah, could you talk a little bit more about these watercolor devos?
I mean, it makes sense to take what you're really passionate about and simmer in it with whatever you're creative with, right? So looking back again, it made sense, but at the time it just felt like, I don't know, like this is kind of serious and this is like fun and I don't want to be, you know, too focused on the fun and I don't know, I overthink things. And yeah, I found that, I hope I can be free to say this, but I was surprised to discover that God was fun. And two, that I really just kind of simmered in things, you know, whether it be feelings or what I'm learning, I was able to simmer in that and play too. So yeah, like I said, sometimes my paintings are really literal, right? Like I'm painting a portrait of a person. And sometimes it's just a word. And if I give myself that time to just do, even if it's just 15 minutes to just do whatever I want, then that's a muscle that I actually need to exercise to apply it to a lot of other things in my work or in whatever I'm trying to put out into the world.
I love it. Yeah. And also not putting that pressure on yourself, like kind of typecasting your own thing that you invented, this watercolor devos, to not like be like, all right, well, it has to be a word and it has to have this and like, or it has to be a portrait and it has to have that, like just doing whatever, you know, like whatever kind of comes to you.
Yeah. I think there's like a hierarchy of what's art and what's, you know, doodling and not really art. And then you try to place yourself somewhere. And hopefully at some point you stop caring and you just do what you're excited about at the moment or what you're passionate about instead of labeling yourself, like you said.
Right. Now, what has like doing this done for your Christian devotion then? Has it like kind of changed your mindset like when you get into that place? Like when you're, can you go back to the old way that you used to do your devotion?
Yeah, it always is changing. And so there's this kind of reminiscent, I think, aspect to a faith walk where you're looking back at a time and you're like, man, we were so tight then. And how do I get back to that? And then you take, you know, 10 steps further and you look back at to where you are now and you're like, that was a good time. So, you know, actually the painting was kind of my warm up to be okay with me. Or it, you know, I read actually in a book by Larry Crabb where you start praying with your red dot, where you are at right now. And I think that's what painting does for me. I just start painting where I'm at, and then I'm able to think deeper, receive anything else that's going to take me further in my walk. Does that sound too lofty?
No,
Do I need
not
to be
at
more
all.
practical?
Not at all, because, well, I think that applies to anybody no matter what. Like getting to your art or your creative passion is like, it should be like this like devotion to at least yourself, you know what I mean? Where you're like, you are figuring out what you think about the world, where you are in the world, and kind of where you want to go. It's like a very good meditative time. So like to like really treat it like that, to treat it like a meditation, a devotion, like a time at your sanctuary, whatever you want to call it. It's like so important to like get to that place or attempt to get to that place rather than having all those other things that we talk about on the show all the time, all these other thoughts in your head that are kind of this like block to your future, to get them out of the way, to try to like destroy those, you know?
And then you find yourself devoted to that time. You are devoted to that because you realize that that's where you kind of touch base on your calling, even if you're just painting an elephant, like, I do sometimes, or a unicorn or whatever.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Once you can start to get that feeling, it's like something you can't live without. You know, you need to get to it every day, or else you're not yourself. You're not like figuring out where you're at in the world.
Totally.
So was there a hesitation ever after you started doing these Devos where to share it, like to share it with the world, or to like show people this like new kind of thing that you've just created?
Yeah, so I started out as, I'm not going to show anybody, because that actually helped me to get painting. So because I hadn't painted in maybe 3 years, and I didn't want to, start painting thinking of the end result, thinking of the critics, or thinking of how it would be received. So I promised myself I wouldn't show it, and then I started showing it, right? Because I started feeling like, it's something that I needed to share, and what if other people don't feel like they have the permission to do this? And I wanted to show creatives that they could, and non-creatives that this was something that could maybe nourish them. I shouldn't say non-creatives, because I have a hard time believing that,
Right. Non-practicing creatives.
Non-practicing? That's a good way to put it. I started sharing it, and then that's how I started the Etsy shop, just because someone would ask me, hey, can you do this verse or this thing, or can I have a print of that thing you did? And it was just the easiest way to get that going. And then, the shop looked pretty pathetic with 2 things in it. So let's see how, if these other things, these other popular verses would resonate with anyone. And it kind of went on from there. Then I felt like I need to write a little more background behind it, because I do think that that's just as important as the art, to not be like, hey, this is what I did, everybody, look at how amazing it is. Right. But to walk people through how you got to that point. I think that people want to be in that journey, and they want to, not only are they curious about how you created this thing, but they want to take part in whatever it was that you enjoyed, what you were like really relishing in. So then that started the blog. And it's funny then, when we started our process to adopting our second son, he was our first adoption, but our second son, I started getting a lot of feelings again, and late nights painting, and then blogging. And since then, I haven't blogged as much, because I wanted to spend more time painting, and I had less time to work with 2 kids. So that's why that's kind of fallen by the wayside, but maybe it'll come back again.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I like that you mentioned the idea of including other people in your journey. And I think a way that you are able to do that is through your Skillshare classes. So I was wondering if we could kind of approach that from both sides, like as a teacher, and then also like for people listening, if they want to brush up on their skills or learn something new. So maybe let's start with kind of your journey, like what brought you to Skillshare, and then what are your classes typically like?
So I started doing a couple of YouTube videos, and I was starting to feel like blogging wasn't really my gig. I enjoy writing, but it's not necessarily like, I don't know, something that I love as much as painting. So I started doing a couple of YouTube videos and looked into how to start teaching, because it's funny, I see my son do this now. While I'm doing something, I'm almost giving myself instructions, especially if it's something new. And so it comes naturally to me to kind of break it down and give pointers on, this is how I do this and this is how I do that.
Like out loud, you're doing that?
No, in my mind. But, I probably would benefit from doing it out loud. That would be good. Yeah. So I started looking into platforms where I could teach online, and I liked Skillshare's vibe. Like, it felt professional and yet creative, and I just felt like it was a good fit. And they had a teacher challenge, and I'm a bit competitive, so I was like, okay, this is how I'm going to get this done. So in that challenge, they asked people to publish a class, and they would kind of coach you through some of the milestones of putting your content together, just kind of getting your idea in your head, and then putting the video together, et cetera, et cetera. And to my surprise, I won that challenge. And honestly, I hate watching that class, my first class, but I guess it was good enough for that time. And I think the prize was 1 year's membership to Skillshare. I think the prizes have gotten way better since then, but that was my prize. Sometimes I feel like, oh, I wish I had gotten a laptop or whatever it was that they had that much, but whatever, it's cool. It's worked out. It's worked out. So that motivated me. That win motivated me to do another class. And Skillshare HQ actually reached out to me and said, we want to help you in any way we can to create more content, because just like me, they had noticed that there was a hole at that time for watercolor in their platform, watercolor videos. And now it's not necessarily a gap, but it's pretty saturated. But it was great timing for me. And so I just started with what I really know. I realized that if I set up a class that's on, this overarching large topic, I'll be too intimidated, or it'll take me forever. And there's just too many voices that come in and say, maybe you shouldn't do this. But if I concentrate my class topic on something that I know I can own and I could teach in my sleep, so to speak, then I'll do it. And so I think you can see in my classes how they've gotten progressively more complex. So right. I teach on watercolor. My most popular class is watercolor florals, 3 ways. Watercolor florals are a big deal. And then I thought, let's show 3 different ways to go about it, in a looser way, in a vintage way, and whatever you want kind of way. And another popular one has been faces. So how to paint cute, tiny little faces. I didn't feel confident to jump into portraiture just yet, but I could do expressive little faces.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Now, I think it is good for people to jump in without not jump in without a plan, but maybe like take baby steps. And I think that it can be very helpful for people to, as they're doing whatever it is, whether it's painting or writing or photography or anything, is to kind of talk to yourself in that kind of instructor voice. You know what I mean? To really analyze what you're doing so that you understand what works well, what doesn't work well. Because I think so often people just get used to something. They have this muscle memory for something, and if somebody asks them how they do it, they can't explain it. So to try to explain it to yourself first. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean making a video. I actually suggest for artists to do like a time-lapse video, just to see what worked, what didn't work, why you did what you did, to try to explain that to yourself. So it might be a good idea for somebody to maybe make a fake Skillshare class, just like in their own mind, you know what I mean? Just to start that analytical thing going and see if maybe they do have a knack for Skillshare. So what if somebody like that, somebody that's kind of just dipping their toes into it, would you have any suggestions for them to get involved with Skillshare?
I definitely do agree. Something that you feel like you can put your stake in the ground and say, I'm a master at this, however small, they're not small, but, just not all encompassing type of skill. That would be one thing. Another thing is, as you talk yourself through the steps in which you go to do it, to break down kind of that transition of, there's always kind of a flow of ideation. You have a concept, you have something that you want to birth, and then there's the actual practical fleshing out. This is how you do it. And then I always add a little bit of a pep talk. I found that that's what people, I think, value the most. I heard someone say that the age of information is over. Now it's the age of support, in that we can receive so much information and how-tos, and this is how you do it. But to feel like someone is with you, doing it alongside with you is huge. And that's really, those are really where the big boulders are. And those are my best reviews when someone says, I feel like Amarilyss is right next to me. She's like my little creative coach while we're painting together. And, you know, I wish we could. That would be kind of fun to have a little, you know, art sesh whenever. But I think that that's really important. Just talking down, also using your own experiences, right? So connecting through experiences that you had. The first time I did this, it totally flopped. Or this is how I felt when I first approached painting, and I had to put away this, and now we're doing these silly little things, or whatever. Experiences, anecdotes, they're so big for connecting with your audience. And then put it out there and don't compare as much as you can, because everyone's got kind of their own thing. And when you start comparing to other classes, it's just not good. I actually, if I'm going to teach something, even though it might seem wise to saturate myself with how other people have taught it, I really try to not at all. For example, I taught how to do a GIF image with your watercolors. So we start painting and then we create this very quick animation through Photoshop. And there are other classes out there that show that, but I didn't want to watch them. I just wanted to show how I did it. And I think there's a lot of freedom in saying, this is how I do it. So you're not saying this is the only way to do it, or this is the best way to do it. And people will glean whatever they can from it. I think we really like this podcast. We enjoy hearing other people's stories, and then whatever we feel applies to our life, we walk away with. So just relieving that pressure is huge. Telling stories and connecting with the audience, even though they're not going to see it in live time. They'll watch it. They'll hear your story.
Right. Yeah, and that's where originality comes from too. I mean, to inundate yourself with like the way other people did it, it can do nothing but like kind of hold you back. I think it's just going to be like, oh, well, I can't explain it as well as this person, or, oh, this thing exists already. Like there's no need for me to create this thing too. Like you said that the Skillshare market is kind of saturated with watercolor painters, but there's only one Amarilyss. Like there's only one of each person. Like you have your own unique way, your own way to kind of sit next to the person while they're doing the thing, to be their, you know, creative buddy. And so you got to put yourself out there in the most original way you can, and to inundate yourself with all that stuff is just going to hold you back in the end.
Yeah. And if I'm a buddy, then they're probably going to want specifically you, or specifically not you, right? I mean, if we're thinking about it as like creating a relationship, for sure, there are going to be people that listen to my class and are like, all right, pass. I really like this guy's approach, or whatever. And it's not personal. It's just the diversity, right, that there is out there that we should celebrate.
Absolutely. Well, now, how about for people that just want to be a student? They don't want to go on Skillshare to teach anything. They just want to learn. Suggestions for them?
I think the hardest thing about Skillshare is that there's so many classes on so many topics. Like I could do a floral arrangement and a cocktail and a painting and a website in one day if I really wanted to. Nobody does, right? What we do is we save these classes. And I'm like, yeah, I'm totally going to do that. I'm going to do that. I'm going to put it on my list. That's going to be great. And so I think being a little more strategic or intentional about what it is that you want to learn this month helps a lot to relieve that pressure of there's so much out there and I want to try it all. I think as a student, personally, that's what I find to be the hardest thing. There's so many sexy classes, but there's only one that I really can apply right now to my career or my creative walk. So being selective, and as cheesy as it sounds, posting your project, I think just adds a nice closure and a community feel. It's really easy on these online platforms to feel like a silo and to feel like a consumer, really. You're taking in whatever you want and you're walking away. But when you contribute something that you created because of the class, even if you don't get a ton of likes or a ton of views or a ton of comments, there's something about just sealing the deal and saying, this is my take. And I always comment as a teacher, I always comment in my classes on projects, and feeling just like you're a part of something rather than just chewing something up and spitting it out. I think that that's huge because I think we really need that. Creativity just kind of touches on so many parts of us, right? Like emotional, spiritual, just mental. It can be very cognitive too. And so to add that personal feel, you really have to be intentional about it. People aren't always going to reach out to you. So put it out there. I love reading books that encourage me to put it out there because there is kind of this tendency to keep it to ourselves for some reason, be it fear or selfishness. Or wondering is it done? Is it good enough or whatever? And there's something in sharing it. I think that creative work is made to be shared. And so I would encourage people to really actually try to partake in the community, and you might be surprised at how engaged others are too.
Absolutely, yeah. That's something we do on the we have a Facebook group. Every Friday, people share what they've done during the week, and I think it is a really good exercise to do that, to put it out there, and to get in the habit of putting it out there, because then it becomes a little bit easier when you have like a big thing that you want to put out there, because you've had these like small practices of doing it, and also like you said, just to have like a habit of doing it. It just gives you that, like, okay, on Friday, like, I'm going to put something out there. I've put something out there the past 4 weeks. Like, what am I going to put out there this week? Even if it is just for yourself, to have that mental habit of creating stuff every week, then like, your brain's kind of working towards what you're going to do as opposed to putting off what you should be doing, Yeah.
Yeah. And you also, like, lose some ownership of it, which I think is healthy. To say, once something is out in social media, I feel like I can't tinker with it anymore, and it might create be its own thing, where whether it's shared again or somebody interprets it a little differently than how I created it initially, it kind of, I don't know, it creates its own identity by being out there. Yeah.
Out there, right?
Out there.
Well, I was wondering if you had any other resistances in your either your art career, you're doing your Watercolor Devos, or with creating classes.
Oh, for sure. I think of my dad, and he's not like a terribly negative person. He's just illustrate this point. When I was a kid, I used to draw all the time. So my parents are divorced, and I would go to Puerto Rico, where I'm originally from and where he is, every summer. And I'd bring all, my little coloring books and notebooks and art supplies. And I'd ask him, I remember there was a summer where I was all about drawing ice creams. I just had figured out how to draw an ice cream cone. And so I drew about 100 of them. And I'd ask him, like, what toppings do you want? And, what flavor is it going to be? And I'd decorate this ice cream cone, and he'd pretend he loved it and was going to eat it or wanted to eat, whatever. It was very sweet. To this day, he still tells people about how I draw ice cream cones. Not drew ice cream cones. How I draw ice cream cones. And so there are times he's said, you have a college degree. You can find a job, right? I'm like, Dad, I have a job. I've been trying to explain it to you. That, it is online, and it is like 3 parts, and it's not a conventional job, but I don't know. I don't know how to explain it to him any better than it's not a 9 to 5, but I make a good living. We're good. So I just kind of leave him at that. Then there was actually my stepdad who raised me, and he was an accountant in the FDIC. So, very left-brained, and he just kind of thought that, drawing was a good thing for me to do. It was nice that I could do it, but what am I going to do? And so there was that resistance. I think also with putting your work out there or teaching online, it's your face, right? So it's not just, hey, this is what I did, bam, and you never see the artist. Like people have to kind of get to know me, and that can be intimidating or feel like a bit of a popularity contest or something, and so those kind of things, when people say, maybe on social media, I came here for art, not for religion, or I'm a bit too much or whatever, just letting that fall away is something that you kind of have to regularly practice if you're going to be out there. You know, if you're out on the playground, like someone's going to be making fun of you and somebody's going to be your friend. And so getting used to that. But I would, when I think of resistance or difficulty, I think of honestly financial hardship. When I went to school in Savannah, Georgia, it is a very expensive school. It's a private arts school. And to make that happen, we had several loans, and my stepdad took out of his 401k, and there were just so many things, so many nights of ramen noodles, right? Mm-hmm. or not. And yet it helped me know that I wanted to do this. Mm-hmm. So I went through that again when, like I said, when we came back to the States from living abroad, like we were pretty broke because we put everything into our house, which was, you know, in the long run, a good move. But we had a really rough patch where it was like, can you not work? And so I looked at some things that I could do. Maybe I could do this part-time. And again, we had young kids, so there weren't a ton of options. And when I think back on those hardships, and just, I had like a dollar amount. I thought, if only I could make this much, we can make it work. Like this will help in this way. And I got very good at penny pinching and couponing and all that kind of stuff, figuring out all those hacks. And I look back at that time now and think, wow, you know, like just to see how I progressively made a little more, and then, things just started coming together beautifully. And I see that this was meant to be, right? And there's no good story without that rough patch, without that resistance. And having that to look back on is huge. It nurtures me now when I don't have those kind of blocks. And it definitely, I'm sure other people can relate to that and are maybe in that spot right now. And you constantly are asking yourself every night, like, do I have to do this? Mm-hmm. Is there, like, maybe I'm being selfish. Maybe I just need to work at that store or whatever. And maybe you do. But we know that what is really in your heart and just trying to like burst out of you is just not going to die that easy. So you'll make it work, and you'll look back on it, and it'll be not just a good story, but something that really actually still enriches your confidence to move forward.
Absolutely. No, I couldn't agree more. And I think that a lot of people can relate to that. Like it's, whether they're just out of college and they do have like an insane amount of debt, or they're 20 years mm-hmm. into their life and they still have the debt, or just like financial worries, or maybe not even financial worries, but just like the worries of like, I want to do this creative thing and still mm-hmm. make money, and I need to figure out a way to transition that. Would you have any practical advice for anybody in that situation? Like when you were in that situation, like any mental tricks or actually penny pitching tricks?
Yeah, I diversified, right? So I think, you know, Skillshare was one of those things where I was just trying out different things to see what would stick, and finding my place, finding my way. I work as a commercial illustrator, so I work with art directors and not so much students. At least that's the goal, or it was the goal at the time. So teaching online felt like a deviation, but it felt natural too. So I tried that, and I still had the Etsy shop, and I, you know, dabbled with these other online venues. So I think taking stabs, even though you know, while you're setting up that Society 6 shop or whatever, you're thinking, is this a total waste of time? What am I doing? Maybe I need to be looking at some telecommuting job or something. And you just kind of have to let it go and see what happens, right? I mean, you don't know till you try. And so I think, as much as I'm a maximizer, according to StrengthsFinder, as much as I want to focus on one thing and just like give it my all and make it awesome, I've found that kind of trying things in different directions helps not only safeguard, you know, financially how this is going to pan out, because it's a good principle to have in like investments in many other areas of life, but also it's a good way to weed out, okay, what's really you. And so I would suggest that try different things, try the craft shows, try different things, and don't set your hopes up too high, right? Like this craft show is not going to roll you through the month, but it might spark something, and it might be something that, hey, you walked away with that you didn't have before, just as far as how much monetary gain you made from it. So that would be one thing, definitely, to diversify. And another thing that I felt like kind of plagued me in learning my little penny pinching tricks is I looked around at friends that didn't have to do that. And that made me feel down on myself. And just giving yourself the freedom, whether it's a season or just patting yourself on the back for being so frugal and so savvy, doing that instead of, it's so easy to get down on yourself and think, well, they don't have to shop at this, second-rate grocery store, and why do I, or whatever. I started to own that as kind of a badge of pride, and maybe that's not a good thing either, but it helped for the moment. So, and everyone goes through it. Everyone does, it just might not be their turn, but we all go through it.
Right. Well, and something that I've learned is that the other people that you're looking at that, don't have to, actually, maybe they do have to, and they're just not, and they're building up debt, or, you don't exactly know the situation, but also, like, if you can maintain that, that mentality, like when you have to through when you don't have to, then it's just going to be like so much better for your future as far as like saving. So just like to try to even like, once you do get to that point, to like, treat yourself, but also try to maintain that financial mentality. I have found is very helpful in life and just feeling better about it.
And there's so much you can make to just get by and pay the bills. And then there's like this other, I don't know if it's 25% more or what, to feel like you're living a life that, you can go get coffee or you can go to that concert. As Americans, since we're so privileged, we feel like being at just the getting by part is dirt broke, right? Because but what you find is that most people are adding the living part, the fun part, with credit. And that's just something that we chose we didn't want to do, because I don't want to be paying for that fun time I had months ago, and it's not so fun right now.
Right.
That stinks. So
yeah, take care of future Amarilyss.
Yeah, I want a happier Amarilyss.
Yes.
Future. Yeah.
Very cool. So before we let you go, I was wondering, did you have any other resources aside from Skillshare, or anything that really motivates you that maybe could motivate us as well?
I'm a webinar junkie. So Facebook knows me, right? They're just constantly bombarding me with these webinars. Yeah, kind of dangerous. But webinars and podcasts, I constantly want to be learning. And I've talked about how I've enjoyed Rachel Cook's podcast, in where she talks about how we need to schedule our time, or how to frame your time, how to have your own business and have sanity and not be, working all the time. Her and James Wedmore, I listen to, and they kind of have a similar philosophy, just embracing rhythms. I think the whole healthy living part is something that I need to be fed with. So those are the kind of things that I listen to, because I can get carried away with what I am doing, and the whole, the trend of hustle. It just, it's kind of gross, but it does it can pull you in pretty easily too. It's a tide for sure. Yeah, I use an app called Cloze, Cloze, and it helps me keep track with clients. If that's something that you kind of struggle with, like, how am I going to keep up with everybody? It actually tells me, hey, you haven't emailed this person lately, and you usually email every 28 days. How about you, say hi? And that's been huge for me, to not have to worry about keeping up with and nurturing those relationships. It being a reminder, like, yes, I do want to send them an email. Thank you very much. So things like that. There's so much out there in terms of apps. I think it's most important to pinpoint what exactly are your weaknesses before you start looking around. And for me, it would be just really wanting to milk this time management thing, and really use my time well. And also just being okay with not working all the time, because painting is what I enjoy, and it's my work, and it's a lot of things. And so I can get carried away with it. But
well, then how do you kind of balance your time then with everything you got going on? I know you want to get to your art, but also create new classes and keep up with that. And I know that like things build up and there's all these things that people don't see behind the scenes that you have to do for the kind of upkeep of a creative career. So how do you balance the time then?
I do have specific days I do things. So I know that on Fridays are a good day to have kind of a recap. So I have lunch with myself and I look at what I accomplished that week and I write down all the things that I was able to do and how well I hit up these different areas of my business. And it helps me reframe for the next week. Okay, so I see where the gaps are this week and what I want to focus on next week is this because I've got this coming up and I need to have this other thing finished before that. So that has helped. That's my Friday. I've noticed that Tuesdays and Wednesdays get really busy with just emailing, and suddenly art directors realize we need art for Thanksgiving. What do you have? And so then I'm creating these PDFs of a lot of pieces to send to them for them to consider. So I try to block off Tuesday and Wednesday as kind of those days. By Thursday, I'm thinking, I've got to get a lot of stuff done. I got to finish up all these things that I started Monday. So I've noticed this rhythm in my week, and I'll kind of schedule things accordingly. If I know that on Thursday I want to get things done, I'm not going to schedule that, commission job that I want to focus more of my creative energy on. I'll put that earlier in the week before I get all those emails. So I do that with Skillshare on Fridays. I also do comment on projects so that I know that I did that and I know I didn't miss anybody. And I've also noticed just throughout the year, take out your calendar and you'll see that there are just sort of like rhythms that go with that. And so I try to publish a class, let's say at the beginning of the year in January, because everyone feels this new energy to conquer something. So Skillshare is pretty busy in January. So I'll be working on a class in December when really in illustration, that's not a busy time. So I can focus more on that. So I'm constantly bebopping between these different areas, but it's kind of intentional. There's some reason to it. Just trying to remind myself that it's not about the minutes and, have I been able to accomplish this thing within this time slot? It just doesn't work for me. And I don't think that it works for most people, but to see things as kind of rhythms, it's really helped me a lot. And I do have, my family life keeps me on my toes. So I have to get up at a certain time of the day and I have to, get some things ready. And I realize that I want to put up an Instagram post as I'm walking up to pick them up from school. So then I paint, as like my last ditch effort. Oh, I only have like 45 minutes left to, be me and have fun. So that's when I allot that too. So I guess I really rely on my moods to help dictate some of those things. And then I schedule the things that I really don't want to do.
Right. That's cool. And you use a paper calendar or is it digital?
I use Evernote and
nice.
My iCal a lot. And I do it on paper on Fridays just because I feel like, I don't know, it's more reflective, I guess. But it'll eventually be typed into something when it really needs to get done. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah, it makes sense. Very cool. Awesome. Amarilyss, it's time for the final push. And this is where I ask you to reach to the microphone and grab the shoulder of one of the listeners that you've already really inspired today and just give them your best final words of advice and really push them to pursue their own creative passions.
You don't know what you're good at until you try it. So spread yourself thin for a season, try it all, and then come back and regroup and realize where your passion really is. You might have things that you really wanted to accomplish. Look back on today's person a year from now and think of where you want that person to be so that you can be there next year. I think everybody has their own creative calling. And the greatest question you can ask yourself every time you're presented with a project or a spare hour is, what makes my heart jump up and what is connecting me to who I really am and what I was made for? And when you walk in that, you will just naturally be led to things, to opportunities that'll lead you to the next great thing that'll help you feel like you're more useful to the world, contributing to the world, and more you.
I love it. Oh, man. Amarilyss, thank you so much for coming on the show today, for kind of letting us into your life and really sharing your journey and giving us that push today.
Thank you, young man. It's been fun.
And if you want to find out more about Amarilyss, you can find her on her website, which is watercolordevo.com, or on Instagram and Facebook. She is Watercolor Devo. Or we'll have everything linked up at today's show notes page at yourcreativepush.com/Amarilyss. Amarilyss. Amarilyss, thanks again.
Thank you.
A huge thank you once again to Amarilyss. What I love so much about her story is the progression. The progression of at first doing the art because she needed it for herself. And that's something that I always promote to you, is do the art for yourself. Try not to think about those other things. But because of her lack of time, and because of the fact that she felt like she was kind of losing herself, she needed to find that time, that devotion to get to her art. And she didn't think about where it would end up or how it would be perceived, because she told herself that she wouldn't show it to anyone. So start with that if you are having a difficult time either getting to your art, or when you do get to your art, all of those resistances, all of those voices in your head about where it's going to end up, how people are going to perceive it, and what it's going to kind of mean for your life. None of that matters. All that matters is that you get to it first and foremost. And that's when things start to progress. When you get comfortable in that position, when, like Amarilyss, you're like, wow, this is great. I'm so happy to have created this, but other people need to know that they can create this too, or maybe other people could gain something from this. And then you have a little bit more bravery, a little bit more confidence to start to share it like she did. So she shared it, and then that led her to create the blog and to sell her work. And then the writing didn't feel like the perfect fit, so she made those YouTube videos, which led her to go on Skillshare. Like, such an epic journey that she could not have foreseen when she first kind of closed the door behind her after only having 30 minutes to get to her art and just creating for herself. And it's the same for you. You do not know where your creative passion is going to take you. There's no way for you to know exactly where you're going to end up. It's great to have goals, but it's also important to know that you will end up somewhere different. So don't even bother worrying about what your creative passion is going to lead to. You just have to start. Do it for yourself, and everything else will follow. Treat it like a devotion. It doesn't have to be a religious devotion, but it should be a devotion to your life, to the fact that you are a human being that is capable of expressing yourself. And in doing so, you're able to connect with other people that are able to express themselves as well, but maybe aren't doing it, but you can give them the courage to do it. Those non-practicing creative people. That's the gift that you have, and that is why you should treat it like a devotion. That's why you should get to it every day, and you should enjoy the time that you get to it. And if you liked Amarilyss, and if you were as encouraged by her as I was, definitely head to the show notes page today at yourcreativepush.com/260. We'll have her website linked up there, as well as how you can get to her courses, her Skillshare courses, and everything else that she has to offer. On our next episode, we have Joanna Penn. Joanna is a thriller writer and the host of the Creative Pen podcast. It's a wonderful podcast for any of you writers out there, especially the indie writers out there, preparing for NaNoWriMo perhaps in November. But she comes on the show and provides a really inspiring episode for anybody in any creative field. A ton of relatable stuff and a ton of actionable stuff as well. If you want to find out more about Joanna or her podcast or her blog or her books or anything else, you can head to thecreativepen.com with 2 N's. And on Facebook and Twitter, she is The Creative Pen. But that is all I've got for you today. Hopefully you are inspired to go and get your work done. So go and get it done. show your creative passion some devotion, and we will be here for you next time if you need the push again. I love you all so much. Go get some amazing work done, and we'll see you next time. Bye. Never miss a push. Head to yourcreativepush.com/subscribe to find the easiest way for you to subscribe to the podcast.